Carl Allen is so deeply entangled in his monotonous existence that saying no to new opportunities is customary to him. No matter how simple the diversion is, he is eager to turn it down immediately and do something he's comfortable with instead. This is exactly what happens in the opening scene, where he doesn't answer an unknown number. If you are his best friend, then you had better never change your phone number, because you might never be able to reach him. Thankfully, Peter manages to call him and invite him to drink with buddies tonight. Carl is at a video store, purchasing some movies to pass time at home, just as he's been doing for years, so naturally his answer is no, and his excuse is blurry. He says he's at home and he's got a thing to do, but since Peter knows him, and because he is actually standing by the video store and watching him as they speak, he manages to corner him. A few minutes later, he is sitting with his friends Rooney, Peter, and Lucy in a bar. The latter two seem to have a huge announcement to make, so they are glad that Peter is here too. Lucy shows her finger with an engagement ring on, and Peter lights a happy gaze at his friends, expecting cheering and encouragement. Carl does try to applaud this enormous step, but he seems to have a certain history with marriage. Speaking of this history, he sees his ex-wife at the bar with some men. The two seem to be having a really great time, and by a total coincidence, this is exactly the moment when Carl remembers he has to do something really important. He stands up to leave, and as he lies to Peter that his leaving is totally unrelated to Stephanie, the latter comes by to say hi. Carl wishes to be deceased rather than have his ex-wife's boyfriend introduced to him. Peter notices his distress, so, being a good friend, he helps him out with a slight bit of bitterness. Carl's in primal flight or light mode, his area of perception getting increasingly narrower before he makes a terrible joke and runs into a waitress to make a huge mess. Everyone's looking at him as he stands up to leave. On his way to work the next day, he turns down several opportunities and goes on to have a normal kind of day as always. He works in finance and seems to have been stuck in his position for a long time. He acts as if he doesn't care, but clearly he could use some news in his life. The news can scare a person who rejects every possibility of venturing out of his comfortable bubble. But that day, by a fateful happenstance, his old friend Nick runs into him. He's surprised that after such a long time, Carl is still working in an entry-level position at the bank. To the latter's surprise, he hears his childhood friend talk about how adventurous his life has been, and finally, he gives out his secret. He says that he's a yes man, following some personality training program brochures that currently lie in his hands. He gives it to him and urges him to try it out for himself. Nick is sure that it will change Carl's life forever, and to act out the change that this training has elicited inside him, he shatters the window of the bank and, while trying to get away from the police, screams out to Carl to live his life. The only change this conversation causes in Carl, however, is a slightly elevated state of anxiety. His miserable, monotonous life keeps pumping his soul out of him, and it all soon gets to the point where Peter arrives at his doorstep, furious that he missed his engagement party. Not letting him come up with any excuses, he scolds him for missing such an important occasion. He knows Carl has some issues because of what happened with Stephanie, but he makes it clear to him now that if he doesn't change his ways soon enough, he will end up alone. Carl sees a comical but horrifying dream that night, in which his friends stop by his apartment and find him in a crunched, petrified state. They think he's deceased and discuss how bad of a friend he was, until they cover him up. Carl doesn't feel like his life is over. However, he's just stuck. Waking up, he remembers the personal training program and takes his first step towards a new life. He decides to go to a seminar called Yes. Nick seems to have been successful in running away from the police, since he's at the seminar too. Excited to run into Carl in this place, he assures him this talk will change his life. After a short video, followed by an increase in cheering, a man named Terrence appears on stage, chanting the word, yes. After a short introduction and a lot of clever, literary words, he calls for new members to show themselves. Naturally, Carl wouldn't do it himself, so Nick sticks his neck out and points to him. Terrence invites him on stage, then all in the room hear a word from Carl that they despise. Carl says no, and this place gives out slight cult-like vibes, filling up with loud shaming and chanting. Carl draws further back into his shell, so with surprising mobility, the old man runs to him himself. Surprised isn't the correct word to describe the feeling Carl gets when he hears Terrence as he begins his convincing. With strangely clear and perfect precision, he describes his life in horrifying, gloomy colors. He has no girlfriend, no successful career, and no future, constantly making excuses not to venture into life. He's been saying no to every little opportunity, until life began to beat so weakly inside his heart that feeling enthusiastic about anything is now impossible for him. Carl must have known all this to some degree, but hearing it from another person, his life shows itself to him in the darkest of colors. Soon, he finds himself chanting "yes" in tears with other participants. He is ready now to change his life by any means. Starting today, no opportunity will be turned down by him. Coming out of the seminar, he is quickly presented with the not-so-attractive opportunity of driving a homeless man to Elysian Park. Carl knows he must say yes, but the habit seems tough to break right away. That's why he needs help from Nick in this instance. And so, after being given a nudge, Carl agrees, and is assured that he won't regret it. Thanks to Carl's reluctant but still change-oriented attitude, the homeless man gets to drain his phone's battery after borrowing it, and receives almost his entire salary before disappearing into a bush after the ride. At the top of a hill, Carl ends up alone in his car, thinking that this wasn't the best idea. His car runs out of gas then, and as he makes his way down on foot to get some gas, he scolds himself for falling for some faulty doctrine. Once he gets to the gas station, however, a girl arrives on a scooter to fill up her tank too. She hears as Carl whispers to himself bitterly, and suddenly takes a picture of him. Naturally, this takes his attention away from his bad luck for a moment and strikes up their first conversation. Cynically, but still funnily, Carl tells her about his unsuccessful adventure and receives an offer that takes him aback. The girl offers to give him a ride, and even though Carl hates two-wheel drives, he's in a sort of desperate situation. Besides, he seems to find this girl very attractive. For the second time today, he says yes to an opportunity, and this time, it doesn't disappoint him. Even though he goes through what proves to be a highly terrifying experience of driving on a scooter, he ends up wanting to do more new things. This urge prevails to the end, when they both arrive at the top of the hill and the girl decides to head out. Here, after thanking her again, Carl says something unexpected. He says whisperingly that she can go, if she doesn't want to hang around for a little longer to make out. He's surprised with himself afterwards, and terrified after seeing her tramping towards him in a decisive manner, but she just kisses him firmly, then gets back to her scooter and drives away. All that is left of her is a picture of the pair on a scooter. Carl is quite pleased with himself. Inspired by this episode, he agrees to come to work on Saturday the next morning, to test the magical productiveness of saying yes once more. He agrees to every commercial and spam message in his email, including the Persian wife finder site, until a lady comes to his table with her quite attractive small business, asking for a loan. She bakes cakes, and even though she doesn't seem very talented, Carl is forced to say yes. Afterwards, he shares this decision of his with Norman, his boss, who seems to be the kind of boss who craves being loved by his employees. Happy to see initiative from Carl, and further taken to the moon by the fact that he was called Norm as a nickname, he gives Carl an enormous promotion. That night, he shares his news with Peter and Rooney and drinks his mind away in a bar. It's been a lifetime since he had a fun time like this. In one moment, he's so immersed in his manic state that he kisses a random girl by the bar and gets into a fight with her boyfriend. The fight outside is hilarious. He gets on the ground a few times, but makes a theatrical scene without getting any severe injuries. In any case, he's so mindlessly drunk that he doesn't care at all. The next morning, he feels nothing even closely resembling a hangover. Immediately after opening his eyes, he laughs at his own behavior last night and goes outside. Tilly, his neighbor, asks him to help her put up some shelves, and since saying yes has always worked for him thus far, Carl agrees. After getting it done, however, Tilly gives him an offer that forces him to drop this whole yes thing for the first time. She expresses her intent to become sexual with him, and stabbing back, Carl escapes her apartment, assured that he cannot say yes to everything. Closing the door, however, his shirt gets stuck in the frame, and a series of unfortunate events come after. Pulling it away, he loses his balance and rolls down the stairs, until he gets confronted with a horrifyingly aggressive dog. Thankfully, a chain stops him just by his face, but gnawing and barking at such a close distance. This dog resembles a danger to Carl that will suddenly ensue if he decides to break his promise of accepting every opportunity. This is why he gets back to Tilly's apartment shortly after. and, horrified by the dreadful experience, is more than a tiny bit surprised. That day at work, he accepts Norman's invitation to a Harry Potter costume party. And with this, his new method of living resumes and new exciting things start flowing in his life. One morning, he accepts an invitation to a show by a band named Munchausen by proxy. A brochure of it has been presented to him countless times before, but he hasn't been interested till now. At first, the concert is so bad that it's amusing. Together with the band's 5 listeners, Carl doesn't regret coming here at all. But in one moment, the flavor of the music changes abruptly, and the girl he met in the gas station appears on stage. The gear shifts quite a lot during the concert, and a wide variety of moods are created. The girl seems to be an extremely talented singer and an unconventional, witty songwriter. After the show, she comes up to the bar where Carl is sitting and is happily surprised by his presence. The latter compliments her songs and, after one humorous conversation, asks her if she wants to get a drink. As it seems, she must wake up early tomorrow, so the two decide to walk to her scooter. The stroll proves to be long, and they seem quite attuned to each other as they speak. Carl learns that she's teaching a jogging photo group, helping people who want to both exercise and practice photography. She also likes to paint and volunteer at a shelter. In a dark, empty street, they have a delightful conversation. Carl asks her out in the end in a witty fashion, and since she seems to like his funny ways and colorful personality, she invites him to come to her jogging lesson tomorrow. Finally, they learn each other's names and call it a day. Her name is Allison. Carl is extremely sleepy and fun-stricken, perhaps even drunk the next morning after saying yes to a night out. Flamboyantly, he says goodbye to Rooney and someone named Lee, and runs to Allison and her group. Full to the brim with Red Bulls, he seems extremely energetic. He has no camera, but he doesn't care. With no concern for anything, he shoots with his phone while always being first in line, sprinting like a madman. The group soon finds him on the verge of passing out on the ground, and they get some good shots. After drinking gallons of water, he and Allison have a talk as dawn breaks in front of them. The girl admits that she likes the fact that Carl is so unpredictable. He seems to be open to life. Not mentioning the fact that it's just been weeks since he changed the gears, he speaks about how unreasonable it is to live your life in a box. Allison feels comfortable with him, so here, Carl learns about her past unsuccessful relationship. She seems to have been suddenly left behind by a guy she thought of as the love of her life. Despite this gloomy topic, however, the two still end the conversation in a cheerful tone. Hilariously enough, Carl is sitting together with Peter and a lady named Farinaush. He met her on the Persian wife finder site, and even though she probably saw this meeting as a date, Carl can't stop talking about Allison. Peter agrees with most of what his friend's new philosophy entails, but he seems to be unable to help himself but be a little troubled with what is currently presented to him. His fiancée, Lucy, joins them then. She sees the changed Carl for the first time, and is extremely surprised at how easily he agrees to do anything. Farinaush seems to be attracted to his agreeableness. That evening, we see Carl and Allison appearing at the Harry Potter costume party. Norman is delighted to see them come, compared to the company gathered inside his apartment. That night they play Quidditch, watch far too many Harry Potter movies, and leave the party before they are so immersed in it as to spend the entire night there, finishing the whole series in one go. For the first time, he tries out riding a scooter in the next scene, and suddenly gets a very exciting idea. The fact that he comes up with this idea speaks to just how much he is attuned to Allison in this moment. Putting this plan into action, the two break inside the stage of the Hollywood Bowl and experience a magical feeling. Her face is so bright with awe and happiness that Carl fails to look away from it. And after a quick impromptu performance, they share a warm, lovely kiss. Finally, sitting among the higher rows of empty amphitheater, they speak about how humans forget the taste of a playful and colorful life, while foolishly reaching for fame and success. A security guard appears out of nowhere, and they manage to run away laughing. The next morning, Carl passes a lengthy line of people who came to him to ask for a loan, and enters a room where Lee is waiting for him to get some money. Before Carl can get to work, Norman calls him and reveals to him that they are in big trouble. Someone from corporate has arrived today and wants to meet with them both. Carl has been giving out money left and right, and Norman has been watching this process unfold without doing anything. If something bad has happened, both will be responsible. Carl isn't very afraid. Losing a job doesn't horrify him much, And so he gives out his final loan to help Lee get a new bike and enters the meeting. As the vice president of their bank says, Carl has given out more than 500 microloans in the past 2 months. This is totally unacceptable, and at first, he thought Carl was just draining the bank's finances for his private needs. Looking into the matter more closely, however, he discovered that the opposite is true. This microloan actually won the bank a fortune, so Carl is now presented with an opportunity to work in corporate America. Naturally, he happily agrees to take this gigantic promotion. Later that day, he helps Lucy plan her bridal shower, using his newly acquired Korean language skills surprisingly well, when someone rushes into the room screaming that a man is standing on the edge of a building nearby. Arriving at the location, he decides to run upstairs and talk him down. When finally the moment comes to say something, however, he catches himself, struggling to come up with sentences. He notices a guitar then, and by some heavenly inspiration, he turns this dreadful instance into an improvised concert, in which even the crowd downstairs soon engages, after which a man's life is saved. That night he goes to an airport, aiming to go anywhere with Allison. Before he meets the latter, however, he runs into his ex-wife and her boyfriend. After seeing him in the news, Stephanie seems to be gazing at him with a different kind of glance. Looking forward to an adventure, Carl sees Allison waiting for him in the next scene, and picking her up like luggage, getting to a counter. The first flight available seems to be going to Lincoln, Nebraska. It sounds a little boring, but they book it immediately and land there the next morning. After spending what appears to be the most adventurous and fun day, they walk down a country road when the rain catches them. Carl covers her up quickly and, like a white knight, saves her from falling asleep. Acting all theatrical, he finds a barn and unravels her there. Allison is looking at him in a way we have never seen her before. Without thinking too much, she puts her feelings into words and tells him right away that she loves him. It is a delightful moment in which they both reveal love to each other. To his surprise, Carl also hears her suggesting that they move in together after they get back. He pauses for only a moment before giving a positive answer. Allison is hurt that he paused. Hesitation and a negative answer are almost equal to her in this instance, but Carl soon manages to assure her that he only did it because it's a big step. He is more than happy to commit to her. The next day, as they book another flight to Los Angeles, he acts a bit worried, as if he's a little distant, thinking about something in his head. Suddenly 2 detectives approach them, and after a short dialogue, they put him in handcuffs. They act quite hostile, as if they are sure that they just caught a very important criminal. At first, Carl thinks it is just one hilarious prank, but in the next scene, as he is questioned by the detectives, we understand that they have a lot of reason to be suspicious of him. All of his activities, starting with his excessive loaning history, ended with his little date with a Persian woman. This upsets Allison the most. Carl realizes here that he really is in trouble. He should choose his words carefully, and since he's not sure that he can explain himself properly here, he calls up Peter, who seems to be an attorney. Shortly after, Peter drops by, and the detectives end up being satisfied with his case formulation. They do not have any more doubts as to who Carl is, but the same cannot be said to Allison, who just found out that Carl has been engaging in all sorts of activities with her only to conform to some covenant with the personality training program. In light of the information she was so abruptly given, Alcyon's entire perspective on their relationship changes. She isn't sure anymore that Carl was honest at any point in their story. Carl fails to come up with strong enough justification for himself, so after handcuffs are removed from Allison, she stands up and leaves. In an airport, Peter tells him that it is all his fault. He should have weighed all the possibilities and been reasonable with all of his decisions, instead of blindly saying yes to everything. There is no secret magical and destructive mechanism that begins working after you turn down something you don't like to do, or weigh an opportunity that seems questionable. Carl tries to get in touch with her afterwards, but to her misfortune, a time of melancholy and routine begins in his life. The unsatisfying consequences of his actions are beginning to sting as he goes to work every morning, and he loses his ability to feel good after achieving something great. To fight this dreadful change, he engages in bungee jumping one day. Hanging down from a bridge, waving back and forth, he receives a call and, thinking that it's Allison, answers it immediately. It turns out to be only his boss, however, and he seems to be coming with bad news. The company is shutting down some branches, and he needs Carl to inform Norman about it. It is a dreadful, sad job to do, but Carl does it anyway. Courageously and emphatically, he enters yet another costume party in the next scene and breaks the news to him. After getting back home, he checks voicemail and is suddenly reminded of Lucy's bridal shower. He needs to be fast if he doesn't want to hurt his friends. In the next scene, he meets them outside a bar and tells them in a sorrowful, concerned voice that he needs to talk to them. He leads them in then, and the whole place explodes as Lucy sets her foot inside. This delightful surprise party is filled with the entire variety of characters we've seen so far. Here, Norman finds someone who can cure his pains completely. As for Carl, however, the love of his life is currently at her own exhibition of jogging photos, and as Rooney gets his own date for the night too, Carl shares his plans for moving forward with Peter. He says that he will continue with the method of saying yes, hoping that after refusing to give up, luck will favor him once more. Getting back home, he receives a call and dashes towards his telephone immediately. It's not who he wants to be, however. It's Stephanie calling him after breaking up with her boyfriend. In tears, she asks him to come over, and he does. After sharing some of her troubles, she suddenly begins kissing him, and Carl, for a moment, seems to be drawn to these familiar lips. Very soon, however, he recollects himself, and, for the first time after following the all-accepting philosophy, says no to something. Surprisingly enough, he feels quite calm afterwards. He has done something his body and mind demanded in unison, and he regrets nothing. Coming downstairs, he expects danger from every corner of the world, thinking that breaking the promise will surely unshackle some grave danger to his life. Suddenly, Carl sees his car being taken away for incorrect parking. And as he's so immersed in this state of high awareness of danger, he sees himself in the woman who is doing it and runs away in panic. He has said no, and now he will have to pay the consequences. In the next scene, Terence, the author of the Yes movement, is about to drive away with his car when suddenly Carl appears from behind. He seems to have been hiding there for a long time. The old man is so scared by this sudden revelation that he hits gas unintentionally and drives off into flowing traffic. They get hit quite hard immediately. The next morning, he wakes up in a hospital. After learning that he woke up, Terence pops into the room and scolds him for scaring him like that. Carl has to justify himself now, and he thinks he has quite a solid reason to feel justified. He needs Terence to free him from the covenant, from the promise of saying yes to everything, because it's burning inside. Surprisingly to him, Terence lets him into a secret. You should only say yes to everything while starting off. The purpose of this practice is to just get you started until you can do something, not only because you are forced to, but because you truly and honestly want to. It makes perfect sense to Carl now. Relieved, his face becomes bright. He needs to do something extremely important now. It's 5:30, so he must hurry to get to the jogging photography lesson on time. He's running in the corridor in the next scene when he suddenly runs into Lee, the man he helped purchase his first bike. Immediately Carl asks to borrow it, and even though he has only driven a slow scooter before, he gets on top of it shortly after. His appearance on the top of the hill is quite a performance. Making the tires boil, he drifts in circles while trying to stop the Ducati. He steps towards Allison in an extremely deliberate and manly manner. The latter asks what he's doing here. Clearly, she has no intention to have a nice morning talk with him, and this feeling isn't at all changed by what Carl says next. Continuing to act decisively, he tells her that he does not want to live with her. Allison is just jogging, and so Carl has to say his speech while running after her. In full honesty, he assures her that he said everything in complete sincerity to her, except the part about living together. It makes him extremely nervous. And it's true that this philosophy of life has many holes, but it allowed him to do something he would have never done before. The old Carl would always think he was a nobody, a man who had nothing to share. If he had met her a few years ago, Carl wouldn't have even talked to her. But now he feels like he has something to share, and he only wants to share it with her. Being courageously vulnerable, he asks her to say yes to getting back together, but only if she really wants to. Clearly, his words had an effect on Allison, but all that comes out of her mouth is a maybe. This maybe, however, is completely enough. As it seems, yes and no aren't the only answers one could give to a presented opportunity. Maybe is totally fine, and as they kiss and make up, the entire group of jogging photographers take their first photos while standing still.